This week we are taking a look at Rograkh, son of Rograkh, an Ardenn intrepid archaeologist. Rograkh is an 0-1 for 0 that has First Strike, Menace, and Trample, and Ardenn is a 2-2 for 2 and a white that says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may attach any number of auras and equipment you control to target permanent or player. These two commanders work very well together, as Rograkh is made for equipment decks and Ardenn lets us equip our things for free. In addition to this, having these two partners make our colors Boros, which is the best color for equipment theme. This deck is going to be what is known as a Voltron deck, one creature with lots of equipment on him. This will make us subject to removal, however we can hopefully not only get some protection on him, but also swing hard and fast to deal lots of damage to our opponents before they can afford to deal with us. Let's take a look at our strategy. Our first strategy is to protect our commanders. It doesn't do us any good to have him out if he is subject to being destroyed. So we will take a look at some cards that grant us protection from removal. Thankfully, with him being a 0 cost, that means you can play him turn 1 and not be counterspelled, and we will not have to pay too much commander tax when getting him back out. Our next strategy is to Seek, where we play supporting spells that help us search our libraries for the equipment that we need. Then we need to Hit Hard. Hit Hard is where we will be playing supporting creatures that buff our commander and make him even more deadly. Our final core strategy is Tools of War. If you haven't guessed, this is where we get our deadly equipment to swing at our enemies. And finally, we will be taking a look at how this deck wins before we close the video. Taking a look at protection, we want to protect our commander as much as possible with as little as possible. Many of our protection cards are cheap in order to save our mana for equipment or removal spells to ensure our victory. First up, we have Tiana, Ship Caretaker. Tiana is a 3/3 Angel Artificer for 3 red white that grants us protection for our auras and equipment. It says, when an aura or equipment enters your graveyard, you may return it to your owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. Tiana is a great way to protect our powerful artifacts from removal. Unquestioned Authority is an enchantment aura for 2 and a white that draws us a card as it enters the battlefield. It also gives us protection from creatures, which means activated abilities won't be able to hurt Rograkh, and our opponents won't be able to block us with creatures. Timely Ward is an enchantment for 2 white that makes our creatures indestructible. This does not protect our artifacts, however it is still a really good way to counter removal spells. Boros Charm is an instant that gives us a few options. For red and a white, we can choose between dealing 4 damage to a player or planeswalker, making our permanents indestructible, or giving a creature double strike. This is an instant speed as well, meaning we can cast it after blockers are declared, dealing much more damage or protecting our creatures until the end of the turn. We can also use this as protection for board wipes, just make sure you leave a red and a white open. Spirit Mantle is an enchantment for 1 and a white that grants protection from creatures as well. This is very helpful, again, as it prevents creatures from blocking us. Then we have the classic Swiftfoot Boots. Swiftfoot Boots is an equipment for 2 that gives us hexproof and haste. Since Rograkh costs 0, we probably won't need haste too often, but if we ever need to replay him, this will allow us to attack the turn that we do. Mask of Avacyn is an artifact for 2 mana that gives us +1/2 and hexproof. Another great way to keep our commander on the board for longer. And finally is Mother of Runes. Mother of Runes is a 1/1 for 1 white that lets us tap and give our creature protection from the color of our choice until end of turn. This is very powerful because we can not only use it to protect from removal, but we can also use it to make sure that our creature is unblockable if our opponent only has 1 color of blockers up. Next up we have Seek. Seeking is a very important part of any Voltron deck because we want to be able to find our most powerful equipment as easy as possible, rather than waiting to draw it by chance. I've included a handful of cards that will allow us to do this, executing our game plan as fast as possible. First up is Forging the Tyrite Sword. For 1 red white, we get a Saga. For the first 2 rounds, we get treasure tokens, but then on our 3rd round, we can either search for a card named Halvar, God of Battle, or an equipment card. Just a fair word of warning though, you are more than welcome to search for Halvar, but given he's not in this deck, you probably won't find him. We will be using this card to search for equipment when we use it. Fighter Class is an enchantment for red-white that allows us to pay mana to upgrade it. When it first enters the battlefield though, we search for an equipment and put it in our hand. This is really we will all be using this for, because we don't need cheaper equip with Ardenn, and we are trying to not be blocked, so we probably won't want to use that feature unless there's a certain card our opponents control that is causing us trouble. Then we can just use it as removal. Important note here is you do have to upgrade in order though, no jumping from level 1 to 3 unfortunately. Armored Skyhunter is a flying 3/3 for 3 and a white that enters the battlefield, and we get to look at the top 6 cards of our library. We put an aura or equipment found this way onto the battlefield. If we play an equipment, we equip it for free. The rest of the cards go on the bottom of our library in any order. Next up is Relic Seeker. Relic Seeker is a 2/2 for 1 and a white that has Renown 1. When it does combat damage, we put a 1/1 counter on it if there isn't already one there. When it does become Renowned, we put an equipment card from our library into our hand and shuffle. Open the Armory is a simple sorcery for 1 and a white that lets us search for an aura and equipment and then put it in our hand. Very simple, but it's still very powerful. Stonehewer Giant is a 4/4 giant warrior for 3 and 2 white that has vigilance. It also allows us to tap it and pay 1 to search our library for an equipment card and put it on the battlefield. We attach it for free as well. This is a great repeatable search for equipment that we will utilize nearly every single round we can. Then we get to Cole the Forge Master. Cole is a 2/2 legendary dwarf warrior for red and white that returns our commander to our hand when it dies. This should be an easy way for us to avoid commander attacks, and since our commander only costs 0, we should be able to instantly take him back out. Finally, we have Sun Titan, which is a 6/6 giant for 4 and 2 white that has vigilance. It also allows us to take a permanent with mana 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield when it attacks or enters the battlefield. We can use this to get our equipment that is destroyed by our opponents back very easily. Our next strategy is to hit hard. Hit hard is where we will buff our commander with supporting creatures that will allow it to get the most power possible. First up is Rayov Master Smith. Rayov is a 2/2 for red and a white, and whenever our commander attacks, it gains double strike. This will likely be doubling our damage, and since we already have first strike, it's not as powerful, but double strike will do a ton of damage, especially with trample. Then is Brunar Battlehammer. Brunar is a 5/3 legendary dwarf warrior for 2 red-white that gives our commander +2/0 for each equipment on it. We also get to equip our first equipment per turn for free. That way we won't have to wait for Ardenn's ability during combat in case we need to equip something fast. Ryu Storm's Edge is a 3/3 human samurai for 2 red-white that has first strike, and whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, untap it. If it's the first combat phase of the turn, there's an additional one after this phase. Not only will this allow us to hit twice if we would like, it can also be used to untap our commander and be able to use it as a blocker after attacking once. This is an extremely high value card that we will want to get out as soon as we can. Kedis Emberclaw Familiar is an elemental lizard for 1 and a red that says, whenever a commander you control deals damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent. This does not deal combat damage to any other opponent than the one we swing at, so keep that in account when figuring out your commander damage. But it's still a great way to deal massive amounts of damage to each opponent. And finally, we have All That Glitters. All That Glitters is an enchantment for 1 and a white that gives our commander a +1/1 for each artifact and enchantment we control. This can quickly get us high numbers as we'll be filling up our board with tons of equipment and auras. Finally, we get to Tools of War, the most fun and important part of our deck. Tools of War are the equipment we will be playing and then attaching to our commander for free with Ardenn's ability. Not only will we be utilizing cool equipment, but we will also be completely avoiding paying equip costs, which for some of these cards is very high. First up is Ogre's Cleaver. For 2 mana, we get to give our commander +5/0, and we can completely ignore that whopping 5 equip cost, as Ardenn will give it to us for free. Then we have Two-Handed Axe. Two-Handed Axe is an equipment for a 2 and a red that doubles our commander's power when it attacks. We can also pay 1 additional one and a red to give him double strike. Double strike with double power equates to 4 times the damage. If this connects, then we will likely be swinging lethal commander damage with 1 swing. Thran Power Suit is an equipment for 2 that gives our commander +1/1 for each equipment and an aura attached to it. And it gives it Ward 2, meaning opponents must pay an additional 2 mana for each spell they target on our commander. Hero's Blade is an equipment for 2 mana that gives our commander 3/2. It also allows us to equip it to a legendary creature for free when one enters the battlefield. Lizard Blade is an artifact creature equipment lizard for 1 and a red that grants us double strike. Simple yet effective. Then we have Loxodon Warhammer. It's an equipment for 3 mana that gives our commander +3/0 and lifelink. We already have trample, so we can't utilize that, but the lifelink should grant us tremendous amounts of life gain. Sword of Vengeance is an equipment for 3 that gives us first strike, vigilance, and trample, and haste. Now we already have trample and first strike, but the vigilance and haste are still beneficial enough to make this a valuable asset. Fire Shrieker is an equipment for 3 that gives us double strike. Now this might sound like a steep cost for 1 keyword, but double strike is an extremely powerful ability that will have us swinging for double the damage. Combine this with our commander's trample, and this is a devastating piece of equipment. Then we have Masterwork of Ingenuity. Masterwork of Ingenuity is a very cool equipment for 1 that enters the battlefield as a copy of any other equipment that we have on the battlefield. We can choose whatever we want, but we will likely be choosing whatever gives us the most value at the time. We won't be picking things that only give us 1 keyword like double strike, because we will likely want to get ourselves more damage or something of that nature. Lion Sash is an equipment for 1 and a white that lets us pay 1 white to exile target card from a graveyard, then we get a 1/1 counter on Lion Sash. Not only is this a very powerful way to buff our commander, we also can get rid of decks with graveyard synergy by exiling cards from graveyards. Nettlecyst is an equipment for 3 colorless that gives +1/1 for each artifact or enchantment that we control. Now this will quickly add up and give our creatures lots of power. Then we get the Basilisk Collar, an artifact for 1 that gives our commander both Death Touch and lifelink. This should gain tons of life and also make it even harder for our enemies to block us. Blackblade Reforged is an equipment for 2 that gives our commander +1/1 for each land we control. Even if we only control a few lands, the numbers quickly add up and will deal massive damage. Bloodford Battle Axe is an equipment for 1 that gives us +2/0. Then when we do combat damage to a player, we get a copy of it. Since we don't have to pay the equip cost, this should be getting us +2 each turn, or more with Double Strike. Trailblazer's Boot is an artifact for 2 colorless that gives us non-basic land walk. This should enable us to hit every single turn with our commander as long as our opponent controls a non-basic land. Cloudsteel Current is an equipment for 2 and a white that gives us flying and the ability to not lose the game. This can definitely save us in a pinch and will keep us going as long as our opponent doesn't remove the artifact. Argentine Armor costs a whole 6 colorless mana, but we get +6/6 and removal every single time we swing with it. This will help us a lot dealing with blockers and with creatures that are causing problems on the board. Now for what's in my opinion the best 2 cards on the list. Colossus Hammer is an equipment for 1 that gives +10/10 but loses flying. The catch here is the equip cost is 8, but since we equip things for free with Ardenn, this card is absolutely devastating for our opponents. When we get to search for an equipment, this is what I would recommend that you seek for. Sunforger is another extremely powerful card that we can equip for free, then pay red and a white to play any instant or sorcery with 4 or less mana value for free. We can then use this to get our board wipes, removal, etc. So let's take a look at how this deck wins. Most of the time this deck will be winning by swinging lethal commander damage. Since we only need to hit 21 damage with our commander and we have trample, this should be pretty easy for us. With cards like Colossus Hammer we will be hitting for 10 damage and this will only be amplified by other effects. The only downside is we can only take one opponent out at a time with this, so make sure you choose your targets wisely. You probably want to try and take out the opponent who's winning rather than the one who's open, as we want to take care of the biggest threat first. Remember, cards like Ketis Emberclaw Familiar does normal damage to each other opponent, not commander damage. Ketis can still be a great way for this deck to win though, as hitting for 10 plus a turn will melt our opponent's life totals. As always everyone, please leave a comment if you end up building this deck and let me know how it goes for you. I always love interacting with you guys, so please leave a comment, even if you don't build it, just to say hi or what's up or whatever. I'll try to respond to every single comment. I hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay cool, y'all. Peace out.